All right, so good morning, afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sam. I'm Keela's marketing director. We also have Elsie, our head of customer engagement, as well as Laura, our head of customer voice. She'll be answering some of your Keela specific questions throughout the presentation today. So welcome to our Care Lab series on email marketing. We've got a super special presenter today. Really, she's the bee's knees. I don't know how we secured her on such short notice. Today, your session will be led by me. Yes, I'm introducing myself. Yes, everybody else on the marketing team is busy. And yes, this is going to be a very fun webinar. Elsie and I are going to tag team to show you some industry best practices on how to set up and create your nonprofit newsletter, as well as how those best practices are translated in Keela. So before I pass it over to myself, I just want to remind everybody about a couple of quick housekeeping rules. The first is that this session will be about 60 minutes in length, including around a 10 to 15 minute Q&A session at the end. We encourage you to ask questions in the Q&A box or the chat box throughout the presentation, and then we'll either get to them via our lovely Laura or at the end during our Q&A period. So while I'm sure we're all very familiar with Zoom by now, I just want to remind you when typing into the chat to make sure that you've selected all panelists and attendees so that everybody can read your question if you wish. All these sessions will be recorded and you will receive the recording along with the slide deck by about the end of the week. So with that, let's dive in. 8 seconds. That's the average attention span for an adult reading your emails. And yes, it does compare to the attention span of a goldfish. So I can guarantee you that your email did not take you 8 seconds to create. In fact, I'm sure it probably took you closer to 8 hours. That's a pretty safe bet. So why go through the hassle of pouring all of your blood, sweat, and tears into your next email campaign? It's because email marketing generates the best return on investment, or ROI, for your marketing dollars. And that equals around $45 for every 1,000 messages sent. And when you boil it down, that's a pretty profitable channel. And you're already ahead of the game when you compare your emails to other industries. Nonprofit emails are 4 times more likely to be opened, and their click-through rate is 25% compared to, say, like Facebook, which is about 7. So in this webinar, we're going to run through the most common type of email campaign today, which is your newsletter. We'll teach you some industry best practices on how to quickly and effectively capture your readers' interests and teach you how to translate these into Keela to make sure it's the best 8 seconds of your readers' lives. Now, first, I want to start with a quick poll, and Elsie will launch that for me. And I want to know, does your nonprofit send a newsletter?
The poll is launched. I did it. I was very worried about that.
You did it, Elsie. You got all the tech down pat.
Houston, we're launched.
You know what? This is actually good results. We see that about 80% do send a newsletter, 83% now, and about 17% don't. So that's actually great. So I'll just pop that off. So we'll share those results for a bit. I'm really happy that you guys send a newsletter. That's awesome. So I actually want to follow that up with another poll. I want to know how often. So those of you who answered yes, how often does your nonprofit send a newsletter out? Is it weekly? Is it around twice a month? Is it monthly? It depends. I want to get a feel for what you think of your schedule is. We got some weeklies there. Yeah, that's overachieving. I like it. I like it a lot. We send a weekly newsletter. It's a lot of work. Monthly, it depends. So it's looking kind of like 50% say it kind of depends, 25% say monthly, and 22% say weekly. Awesome.
Oops. I should be sharing those results, and they are shared.
They are shared indeed. And so for those of you who are not sending newsletters, I'm actually here to tell you, if you're not sending a newsletter, you're missing out on a valuable opportunity to educate your supporters and deepen their relationship with your organization. So how do you create an effective newsletter, you ask? We're going to take you through 8 tips to make creating your newsletter easy, effective, and hey, maybe even something you look forward to sending. So tip number 1 is choose a date and time and stick to it. I don't know how many of you subscribe to Keela's newsletter. I secretly hope it's all of you. If you don't, I highly encourage that you do. But for those that do, you may notice that it gets sent every single Friday without fail at around 10 a.m. with the subject line starting weekly alert. And you know what? We did it on purpose because the golden rule with newsletters, unlike your other types of email campaigns like fundraising or welcome series, is that you actually need to stick to a schedule. The goal is that by your publishing time, your readers will expect the newsletter and look forward to it. And by building a routine, you're ensuring their long-term engagement and providing consistent top-of-funnel awareness about your organization to your database. And you know what? I would argue that consistency matters more than frequency. So if you're worried about biting off more than you can chew, I'd start by laying out a conservative publishing schedule that you can stick with. You can always increase your frequency as you go. And it's also not the end of the world if you send out an occasional bonus issue or two, but pick a schedule you can live with and then really, really commit to it. So tip number 2 is segmentation. I don't know if you recently tuned into Peter's webinar on how to segment your Keela database, but I highly recommend that you watch it. I believe Laura will pop that link into the chat for you, or you can find it in the knowledge base. But the crux of segmentation is that it allows you to group your contacts into lists depending on the demographics or behavior of that audience. So from a fundraising perspective, you can create a live bunt list and send a specific email campaign to re-engage those contacts. Or you could choose to target only your recurring donors to try and upgrade their donations. Now, it wouldn't make sense to send this type of email out to everybody in your database. And in fact, if you do, you actually run the risk of alienating some of your audience. So by using these segments, you can send hyper-personalized emails to the audience that it's most relevant to. And you know what? No, if you're just starting out with your newsletter, you're likely not going to want to segment your list to start with. I'd recommend sending it out to everybody on your list, explaining what your newsletter is, with an option to receive these emails less frequently rather than unsubscribe. You can collect this kind of information via a Keela linked custom form, which asks your supporters what type of content they're after, how often they'd like to receive the newsletter, and anything else relevant that you need to know for your organization specifically. So once you have this information, you can use it to be a lot more targeted. For example, let's assume that 65% of your respondents tick that they want to receive a monthly newsletter, whereas 35% said, you know what, I'd rather actually receive it every 2 months. I get a lot of emails. That's absolutely fair enough. So you can take that data and 2 separate mailing lists. The first would be your monthly newsletter subscribers, that's 65% that answered yes. And the second would be those 35% that actually don't want to receive your emails every month. So you'd send it to them every second month. So knowing this, you could create a monthly newsletter schedule, sending it every month to your main list, but every second month to those 35% who don't want as many emails. You'd be really surprised at how much more engaged your readers will be just by committing to their preferences like that. So tip number 3 is write a really good, and I mean really good subject line. In fact, none of the following steps matter if you can't get someone to open your email in the first place, so save yourself the 8 hours. So where we start is with our subject line. By far the shortest piece of content in your whole email, this is likely where you're going to spend most of the time trying to figure out the exact combination of urgency, mystery, flirtatiousness, and allure to just get readers to click on your email. And that's because 35% of email recipients open emails based on the subject line alone. No pressure. So here are some best practices for writing effective subject lines. And I know that they're effective because they worked on me. So make it descriptive. You want to be clear about what you're offering. Something that sounds too spammy can turn some people off entirely. You want to make it short. So shorter subject lines typically perform better than longer ones. And it's because more and more people are opening their emails from their mobile phones. And that means you need a shorter subject line or else it's truncated. So we actually recommend trying to aim for like 60 characters or less. Hence why in Keela's newsletter, we use weekly alert. And finally, you want to make it urgent. You want to encourage your audience to act right away. Using urgent language gives your audience a chance to take part in something that's only available for a limited time. And for most people, it's worth a click to at least see what's up. So my hint to you is start paying attention to which emails you open. Why'd you open it? What made it stand out in your inbox? You'll start noticing the subject lines a lot more and can deploy the tactics that work on you directly into your database. Plus, every time you open an email because of a good subject line, a marketer gets a cookie. Tip 4 is you want to keep it simple. Remember, people donate to your organization and get involved because they want to be a part of your mission. So the first place to start is by leveraging the power of your nonprofit story. I know there's so many inspiring stories or causes you want to share that you can kind of get trigger happy and include everything. Now, I've seen this before, and while it may feel good to share all the stories, it can actually end up having less of an impact than you want. So let's take a look at this example from the RSPCA. Just give me a second to switch my browser. Right, so we've got the Animal Kind Wildlife Edition. So scrolling through this newsletter, we can meet Chris, the vice president. We see how many wild animals we're helping. We got Spike, Frisbee, Hazel. We can read all about them, get to know the team, little ways to keep areas litter free. How many wild animals did we rescue last year? Let's find out. We can watch Lucy's Story, social proof. All of these are awesome, awesome pieces of content. But I want to ask you, did you notice how many buttons there are in this email? So while this newsletter does an awesome job at providing updates across the organization and sharing different success stories, this is actually no longer considered best practice. With so many different calls to action, more likely than not, you're going to end up confusing your reader with information overload. This ends up diluting your message, and then you lose their interest. So I would recommend having one central button, which in this case would be either a donate or get involved, and then keep the rest of your content short and concentrated around a select few topics in a vertical format. And rather than buttons, because it's a newsletter, you are going to share things. I actually recommend using hyperlinks instead. This will ensure your reader stays focused on your story and has a higher chance of fulfilling your ask, which is your main button. So whether that's to sign a petition, share something on social media, call a number, get involved, or donate, you want everybody to be focused on that. So we can switch to our next example. All right, and we've got the Fair Share Zero Waste Week. So at-home recipes and a big, big thank you. So Fair Share Bites, we come into their newsletter. It tells you exactly what it is. Welcome to Fair Share Bites, where you'll find a healthy portion of news, volunteering opportunities, and surprising facts about food. Cool, I know exactly what I'm getting into just from opening it. We've got their Activate campaign with a video and then a little bit of information and a Donate Now button. And then scrolling down, you've got an extra story, you've got an upcoming thing, watch this space, you've got some highlights from the campaign, and then a Find Out More button. And you know what, this email, while the design wouldn't be, I guess, the best, I feel like this is an excellent example of how your newsletter should look. It tells you what it is and what the reader should expect, has one feature story. You can provide a few more secondary sections without overstuffing your newsletter. And in case your donors aren't at the stage in their journey where they're ready to get more involved, there are other smaller ways to keep them engaged.
It's great for mobile as well because it's all in one streamline. I see a lot of people having, 3 images in a row, and that's going to get stacked when it comes through on mobile. So it's really good practice to keep everything as kind of narrow as possible because people will be scrolling through like that.
Exactly. And that's what we mean by vertical format as well. So good shout, Elsie.
Cool.
Let me just pop that back up. So just to recap, Animal Kind, awesome content. I'd be so interested in reading all of that content, but because it's all bam in my face, I'm probably going to be a little bit confused as to where to start. And I'm likely going to click out of the email before I get into the meat of what the person who wrote that email wanted me to do. Fair Share Bites. Again, you've got the one main call to action, the Activate campaign. There's an extra Donate Now button, and then there's some secondary supplementary information in a vertical format. Keeps me engaged. It's short, it's sharp. I recommend following a format like that. Now, tip number 5 is be informative, but donor-centric. Emails are a very personal channel. You're reaching people in their homes, at their places of work, on the bus, sometimes in the loo. So make sure you're being conversational. This isn't an academic paper, and it absolutely should not read like one. And also remember, this is not about you. So as much as it is that you're asking for a donation or to solicit volunteers or to get someone to read your latest blog, the language you need to use, it should empower your donors. It should make them feel involved, and it should show them how they're making a difference. For example, you wouldn't say, this month we raised $500 and were able to feed many hungry children. Instead, you say something along the lines of, this month, your donation helped to feed many hungry children. It's thanks to donors like you that you were able to continue putting food on the tables for many impoverished families. So that's the same message with a different delivery and has a very different impact. So when you're writing your messages, I want you to reread them and really focus on how it comes across to a reader. If you're not sure, you can always get someone on your team to read it over as well, just to make sure that everything you're putting out is super donor-centric. Tip number 5 is keep your content fresh. Donors, volunteers, and supporters, they all sign up to receive your emails because they're interested in what you do, obviously. So the challenge then lies in coming up with fresh content to consistently fill your newsletter. And rather than stuffing your newsletter like the RSPCA did, you can actually create a backlog, which will make your next newsletter so much easier to create. So using your backlog, you can see whether there are any themes that emerge from the content you saved, or if anything has become relevant or topical. So keep this backlog stocked up with ideas as they come to you, and it'll make your newsletter creation so much less of a time suck, I promise. And to create your backlog, honestly, like you can jot notes down on your phone. I send email links to myself a lot. I'm pretty lazy. Or you can use a tool like Pocket, which is what I pictured on the screen. And so that's pretty much a reading cache. So you can pin things that you see around the web in your cache for later. And then that's a great way to pull content as needed. And if you do run out of ideas, we have 35 elements that you can include to keep your content fresh, which Laura will then pop into the chat for us. Tip number 7 is get personal. So speaking with someone face-to-face is intimate. And while it's much easier to develop a relationship with someone in person, there are a few handy techniques that you can apply to make your virtual relationship feel much more personalized. I recommend that you mirror Elsie and I. She's my work wife. I see her on screen all the time. We live 15 minutes away, but for now, our relationship is
It's
sadly.
blossoming, I think. I feel like we're doing very well. We're very good at keeping that personal connection.
I feel like when I
Take
see you
note.
in real life, I don't know what I'm going to do if you're not pixelated. Anyways, I digress. So when you send a newsletter, you want to send it from a person, not a generic email. So for example, I would send my messages from samantha.lego@keela.com rather than marketing@keela.com. This lets people know that there's a real person they can reply to on the other end of the line. So in Keela, we have something called smart codes. And these are placeholders that gets replaced by the relevant value. So if you use a first name smart code, hey first name actually becomes hey Sam, adding an extra touch of familiarity with no extra time in it for you. Seriously, it's drag and drop. It's super easy. And actually, any information your contacts provide via our forms, you can take and use as a smart code. So this includes things like names, organization, title, programs, or campaign information, allowing you to send super hyper personalized emails. Using smart codes, you can send an email along the lines of, hey Sam, I hope your work as marketing director at Keela is keeping you fulfilled. If you want to chat about how you can improve your Vancouver-based campaigns, reach out and let me know. And while it can be creepy if you try to personalize everything in your emails, using smart codes can actually increase your click rates by up to 41%. And more importantly, it can generate donation amounts of up to 6 times the amount than generalized ones. So sometimes it does pay to be a little bit creepy. However, a word of caution, smart codes are awesome if your database is clean. When they're not, this can happen, which then completely undermines you and makes you look rather silly. Luckily, it does participate in nonprofit simply mean that we have registered for Giving Tuesday and have an approved registration. I'm trying to determine if participating has anything to do with actual location received. AKA Lori had a really good sense of humor about it all. Lori, if you're on here, we're super sorry. We fixed that for sure.
So this was a field, like it was pulling from a different field. So is that the name that we had? And we were like, hi, this big chunk of text. Oh no, clean your databases. Yes. I'll show you how to later on. Oh,
yes.
That's embarrassing.
So we had one hiccup from our chat bot that one time. So if your name is like this in Keela, please let us know. So to avoid situations like this, please make sure that the source of your contact information is reliable. And please, as Elsie said, clean your database occasionally. Secondly, as a workaround as well, with Keela, there's an update your contact information custom form that you can include in your emails so your supporters can change their information if needed. This would have saved Lori the hassle of sending us an email being like, hey, pals, this was funny for a few weeks and now it's not. So
that's not my name at all. Oh, that's funny.
All right, so tip number 8, design. I'm going to pass it off to Elsie to go through some of the more practical components on how to do what we spoke about in Keela.
Thank you so much, Sam. Thanks, everyone. So we've sort of talked about all these tips and, putting them all into place is great. Writing great, inspiring email content, it's all essential, but it does go hand in hand with email design. So that's what makes your content shine. And a really well-designed email is going to be more readable and it's going to catch a reader's eye. But most importantly, it makes your brand memorable. And when a reader remembers you, when they're familiar with the color scheme and the kind of branding that you have, not only are they going to open your emails, but it'll also make them connect and enjoy reading them more. So the good news here is you don't have to be an expert in creating good-looking emails. We've got a bunch of pre-built email templates in our Keela eBlast tool that you can modify to suit a wide range of your campaigns. So you can have one for kind of each campaign style, whether it's newsletter or fundraising or event information. And once you've got one, you can just reuse it. So update the information every week. So I'm going to go through that in a little bit, but mostly I'm just going to be looking at a bunch of tips that Sam's covered and how you can sort of see them in action in your Keela account. So let me share my screen. And let's get into it. Okay, so the first one I want to start off with is probably the biggest one, which is segmentation. So Sam showed a little screenshot of a Keela form and how you can sort of segment your contacts when you're creating mailing lists. And I want to show you how you can do that in Keela so you can take that away. So let's say in this scenario, I'm wanting to give my contacts the option to choose how frequently they want to be communicated with and how often I should communicate with them and sort of let me know what stuff they're interested in. So when it comes to creating those segments that are going to let me send specific e-blasts to specific people, it all starts with contact information. So I'm looking at Scooby-Doo's profile here, and you can see it's got all of the usual information on it. We've got first name, last name, preferred name, email address, all that usual stuff. But if you want to take your segmentation a step further, then custom fields is what's going to be the real magic there. It's going to let you store as much information as you like on a contact's profile. So if I scroll down here to the very bottom, these are all of the custom fields that I have on my test account, and I can update this information in here with any kind of value that I want, and then filter by that information later. So custom fields, that's the first part we need to start with, because we need to be able to store that information, right? So for custom fields, we jump into organization settings and just the custom fields tab up here. So you can see here that I've got a bunch of custom field contact sections. So these are sort of sections that I've used to organize my custom fields. And within that, I've got these custom fields in here. So I sort of put stuff that's similar together so that it's all kind of organized and kept really nice. And you can move it up and down and around and sort of organize it how you like, in a way that works for you. I've already got a contact section set up for communication preferences. If you need to set one up, just click on this big purple button here to create one of these sections to keep stuff organized. But I've gone ahead and done that for today. And I'm just going to go ahead and add a custom field. So from here, let's say the first custom field I want to track is frequency. I want to ask my contacts how often they'd like to receive our newsletter, number one, and also what sort of content they'd like to receive on top of that newsletter. Maybe they're interested in other elements of our organization. So number one, frequency. Let's get that started. So let's call it just something really simple like newsletter frequency. Now, the next thing I can choose when I'm adding a custom field is type. And this is the most important part of custom fields because there's a bunch of different types that you can use. You can see all of these down here. So the first one we've got are single line text and multi-line text. And what this is, it's just a field that folks can type sentences or paragraphs into. It's just kind of like text, any kind of text that you like. So it's good for storing that, but it's not really what we're after now. We want something really specific, not just a bunch of sort of general descriptions. So I'll skip over those two. Next, we've got number, simple date, date and time. And these are really, really specific, a little too specific, if you will. They only accept that specific type of data. So I can only enter numbers in here, or I can only choose from a date here. So not what I'm after. We've got image and files and yes and no down here. Image and files are awesome. They let your contacts upload documents, and those documents will be stored on a contact's profile, or a team member can upload a document. They can be really cool at storing things like volunteer application forms. So really handy, but not what we're after at the moment. And yes and no is just a tick for yes or no there. Now, what we want are the two options here down the bottom, which I think are the best custom fields. If in doubt, these are the custom fields that you're probably going to be using just because they're the most commonly used, I think. I think these are what we think of when we sort of have custom fields. So there's two different options. Both are multiple choice. So this custom field means that we'll determine a couple of options, say 5 options, and our contacts will be able to choose from those options on our form, or a team member will be able to update one of those options in a contact's profile. And the only difference between the two here is how many responses you're allowed to choose of the multiple choice. So multiple choice single select means that a contact can only have one value selected. So out of all the options, only one can be chosen. And then multiple choice multi-select means that folks can choose as many as they like. And we've got a full description of all these custom fields in our knowledge base online, but I figure it can just be good to get a little refresher. So back to business. In this scenario, I want to ask folks how often they'd like to be contacted by me. And I want it to be really specific. I only want them to be able to choose one value so I know exactly where we are at any given time. So I think for that, a single select choice is going to be the best option there. So I'll select multiple choice, single select. And then I can just add those options. I can choose what options the contact is going to be able to select from. So let's go, I'll go weekly, monthly, that's a really common one. Maybe every 2 months, is that a frequency? And then annually. We'll start off with that. So those are the options that folks are going to be able to choose from, but remember they'll only be able to choose one option because I chose single select. So I'll save that. Beautiful. There's my custom field appearing underneath my communications preference section. We're halfway there. One more to go. So the next custom field that I would suggest kind of adding, if you like, if you think it's appropriate for your organization, is capturing things like marketing interests. So I'll add a custom field here and we'll call it marketing interest. Let me just copy and paste that. But this time, because I want folks to be interested in all of our marketing, I want them to be as invested in the information I've got to share about our organization as possible, I'm going to choose multi-select. I want them to be able to select as many as they like of the options. And that's kind of the difference there in the context about how you would use single select versus multi-select. So let's say option number 1 for this is volunteer opportunities. So maybe I'm a volunteer run organization and we sort of let people know when we need them. We've got working bees coming up or things like that. So they might want to hear about that stuff. Fundraising campaigns, events and workshops, and maybe holiday messages. And this is really good because like Sam said, we want to keep your newsletters kind of really specific and not too content heavy. We don't want to jam pack, fill them up. So this is a good way to take out information that you might have normally put in the newsletter and put it in another type of communication so that you can keep both specific and both kind of a little bit shorter. So that's an idea there as well. Okay, let's save. So now I've got 2 custom fields that have been added. If I jump back to Scooby-Doo's profile and I refresh, those custom fields will be added to that profile there. So I'll scroll down and here we go. So you can see that I've got newsletter frequency and marketing interest. They're automatically added to every contact's profile. And if you want, if you're wanting to manually update this information, maybe I want to jump in here, I can edit it and I could just select weekly. I know Scooby-Doo likes to be contacted weekly and he's interested in volunteer opportunities and events and workshops. So I can save that and his profile is updated and later on I can filter out for this information when I'm creating segments. But we want to see how you can automate that, how you can avoid having to manually update everybody's profile. So the next step of this is adding these custom fields to a form so that your contacts can fill it out from their own, from the bus or from their car while they're waiting in traffic, wherever they are when they read your newsletter. Maybe they're on the loo, who knows? No judgment from here. I definitely read a lot of my newsletters there. But the point of this is that we're jumping into forms because we want to be able to automate that for you because you're busy enough, let's be honest. So I head to forms. Now I've got a subscription form already created for today's session. But if you don't have a subscription form yet that lets folks sign up to your newsletter online, just create a form here and just make sure that when you select form type, that you choose subscription and you'll get your own created. You'll be able to design it from there. But I've already got a form type subscription here. So I'll jump in here and we'll click in it. I've called it communication and subscription form. And I'm going to head straight to the setup tab because this is where the magic really happens with adding questions. So in here, you can already see that we've got some fields that you can add to your form. And what this is it's just fields that directly relate to all of those kind of general fields I was showing you before. So things like your first name and your last name, all that general stuff that we have on everybody's Keela account. Everyone kind of uses these fields. So just make sure that you've got at least first name and last name selected. Definitely make sure that they're required. We don't want anyone to be subscribing without a first name because you want your smart codes to be able to pull that information, right? If you want, I've got down here, preferred name is shown on the form. It's an available field, but I don't have it as required because not everyone has a preferred name. So that's an optional little extra bit. People can kind of personalize their own profiles a little further with that. Email address, of course, that's the most important part. Or actually, probably this one's more important. Subscribe me to your newsletter. So this will let them physically opt into your newsletter, which is really important for your compliance to make sure that you're sending emails out to people who've opted in. So if you give them that opportunity, your database will have that, store that information. So make sure that's required as well. So those are the standard fields, but form questions, the magic. Let's see the magic show. That's why we're all here. Here's where you're going to add those custom fields and make sure that that data is captured and stored on a contact's profile. So the first question I'll add, it's going to be the one that asks people to tell me how often they'd like to receive my newsletter. So I called it newsletter frequency in my custom field, but here the question I'll make a little bit more friendly. So how often would you like to receive our newsletter? Now, the next thing here is you can choose the type of question that you'd like to display on your form. And they're all the same types that we just discussed. And something that's really important here is that whatever type you select here will automatically filter the custom fields that are available here to choose from. So you can choose a different type. Maybe I want to choose files. When I look at the custom fields that are available here, the only custom fields that I've added that will be displayed here are those with that specific type. So only files are going to be viewable here. And the reason for that, the reason why we sort of have the type field filter out the associated custom field is because some folks have 200 custom fields and we don't want you to have to kind of scroll down looking for all of them. We wanted a quick way to filter them out so that you can just jump where you need to go. So I'll show it in action. So the first one I selected, remember, was multiple choice single select. That's what I chose for frequency. So if I choose that one, there's my newsletter frequency there. So see how it kind of narrows it down. Just a tip for you, if you ever sort of think, where's my custom field? It's probably because the type you've selected doesn't match up. Okay, so here's my associated custom field, newsletter frequency, and all those options that I selected are there. So I'll go ahead and I'll save that. Now you can add questions to your form and not connect them to a custom field. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. And not connect them to a custom field. You don't have to. If you want, you could just keep this as none if you wanted, and it wouldn't update a contact's profile because it's not connected to their profile that way. Completely up to you. But you can always tell if a question is connected to a custom field and if it's definitely going to update a contact's profile just by looking in this column here. If there's nothing here, that means it's not connected to a custom field, so it's not going to be updating your contact's profile and you're not going to be able to filter on it. But I've got my custom field there. It's beautiful. I've set everything up. It's ready to go. The last thing I'm going to do for this question is I'm just going to make it required. I want everyone who subscribes to my newsletter to tell me exactly how often they want to hear from that newsletter. I want to make sure I get that information because I'm going to be creating, some mailing lists based on this information. I want to make sure everyone's captured. So I'm going to make that required. Okay, remember we have 2 questions I want to add to this though. So let's go to question 2. And that one was the marketing interests one. So maybe I'll say for this question, would you like to receive any other marketing communications from us, just in case? And remember, I chose multi-select, so I'll grab that down here as the type now. And there it is at the bottom, the most recently added custom field. There's the options, and I'll click save. Now this one I won't add as required. I want people to not, if they don't want to receive anything, I want them to just be able to skip this question on the form. But if they do fill it out, more the better. Okay, let's see how it looks. So if I proceed to designer, you can sort of see how that option is going to be, those questions are going to be displayed. So someone might choose weekly here, and then they can tick as many of these options as they like before they subscribe. Oh, they're going to tick that. So that's how it's going to kind of appear. Okay, so we've created our custom fields. Our contact profiles are ready to store information. We've created our forms and we're ready to capture that information. The next thing I want to do is get my segments ready so that when we do start receiving form submissions, that information is going to go to all the buckets that I need it to go into. So I'm just going to create an example for you to see today. So segments, which is what we use to send out e-blasts or create mailing lists, jump into contacts and head over to segments here. And I'm just going to create a new one. Okay, so for this one, let's call it newsletter frequency weekly. I'm just going to create one segment today. And I think because I'm sending out to the weekly newsletter subscribers more often, I'll start there. And then at the end of the month, I can make a monthly one when it's time to send an email to those folks. I'll give it a little description, just a list of contacts who've advised they would like to receive the newsletter every week through my subscription form, just in case anyone else stumbles on this list and my team and wants to know what it is. And we'll select next. So the most important part of segments is filters. So a segment begins its life as a complete list of every single contact that you have in your database. And then you use the filters to pick out bits and pieces of information on their profiles to create a more specific list, to narrow it down. I definitely recommend checking out our how to use filters training video if you haven't already, if you want information on how to use these filters in more detail. But I'll give you a little example now as well. Okay, so click add a new filter. That's where I want to start. And it's contact information that I'm wanting to filter my contacts by. So I'll click contacts. And then I'll go down here. I'm looking for custom fields. I want to filter by custom field information. Let's select newsletter frequency is the custom field specifically I want to filter by, contains any of, and we'll choose weekly. So I'm wanting to filter for all contacts that match all of these conditions, where the condition is their newsletter frequency field must contain weekly. So I'll save that. And there's Scooby-Doo already. So remember, I manually updated Scooby-Doo's profile to be weekly. He's automatically been added to this list. But if I head back to segments, this list is going to stay here. And as people start filling in my form and choosing weekly, they're automatically going to be added to this list and it'll be kept up to date. So I know that next week, 3 months from now, I can head back to this list and know confidently that it's up to date and that Keela's automatically use those filters. Yeah, it's awesome, eh? I love it. Okay, now let's get to eBlast, right? So I've got everything ready to go. Time to jump into an eBlast and see how it all comes together. We've got eBlasts over here. I'm going to jump into saved templates. And I spoke a little bit about this before I got started with my segmentation story, but templates in here are definitely the way to go. If you're not using them already, I recommend it. You can create a template and use it over and over again. If I go maybe a new template, and you can choose from all of these pre-built templates that we have to kind of get you started. So I would choose one of these, change the coloring, change the branding and the logos and things like that. But this will give you an idea of how you can structure it if you don't know where to start. Or ultimately, you can just select basic down here and build it from scratch as well. So that's how you can use our inbuilt templates and create a template you can use moving forward. But I've already got one set up, so I'm going to jump straight into it. It's my newsletter template here, so I can show you how this stuff all works. So I've got my custom fields, I've got my forms ready, I've got my segments ready. Let's put it in an eBlast and ask people to fill it out because I'm wanting to automate it. So in this beautiful pink and green eBlast that I've got going on here, I've just added a section in the middle called Tell Us About You. And I've let folks know that I've got a 5-minute survey that they can fill out to let us know how often they'd like to hear from us. And what I'll do is I'll just get a button content block over here on the right. I'm going to click, drag, drop. And this button is going to be how we collect that information from folks. So you could use this to collect updated contact information as well, like Sam demonstrated. So I've got the button. I'm going to, the button type, I'm going to link to a subscription form. I'm just going to link it directly to that form I just created. Let's call it fill out the survey here. Make it a really, really specific call to action that I've got so they know exactly what they need to click. They know it's only going to take 5 minutes. Folks will be way more inclined to do that. And then in the associated subscription form section, I'm just going to choose newsletter subscription here. That's the form that I created. and close, and it's done. So everybody who receives this e-blast is going to be able to click on that and fill in their details, make sure that you've got the most up-to-date contact information, but also fill in those custom fields for you. And you can do this for any kind of information that you like, registrations, other kind of marketing things, volunteer forms, stuff like that, and collect information that way. Okay, that was a really big tip. I've got a couple of more really small ones, so I promise you'll get little bits and pieces now, as opposed to a huge chunk of information. That was one tip. I'm going to talk through the rest, a couple of other tips really quickly. So tip number 4, that was tip number 2. This is tip number 4. Keep it simple. And if you've opened my customer newsletters that I sent out once a month, you'll know that I maybe could take a little bit of this advice myself. I do tend to jam pack them full of goodies. But one thing I do right, which I'm really pleased about, is that I hyperlink. Sam said, avoid using so many buttons. You know, I don't want to take away from this button here. I want to make sure that there's only sort of 1 or 2 buttons on the whole thing. And if I need to kind of send people in other directions, what I can do is hyperlink. And to do that, all you need to do is highlight a little bit of learn more here, you know, put a little call to action, but in word form, insert link, paste the URL that you're going to, and then it'll just appear there as a hyperlink. So folks, it won't draw attention away, but folks still have the opportunity to go to an external website. And this is really great because it means you don't have to put all of the information from that story in that chunk. You know, you can send them, host that on your website or host it on your social media maybe. Send them there so they can learn the full story. You don't have to take up all this room in your newsletter. And also it might get them to your website as well, and it might get them to your social media, which is another level of engagement. So that's always good too. Okay, tip number 7 was get personal. And so as Sam said, one of the best ways to do that is with our smart codes. So if you're not using smart codes already, definitely recommend. If you look up here, I've just got a generic hello friend kind of thing in here, and I want to replace that with a smart code. So if I remove that here, I can use this smart codes button over here to just quickly insert one. Oh, hang on, I haven't. There we go. So I can choose from first name, preferred name, all this different information. But my favorite, the one I recommend everyone use, is the smart name smart code, because it's a little bit more dynamic. The smart name smart code looks first at the preferred name field. It checks for like a nickname or anything like that. And if there's nothing there, then it moves on to the first name field. And if there's nothing there, it moves on to the full name field. So smart names are great catch-all and can be a way of personalizing your e-blast even further. All right, some final tips. Now, these last 2 tips are just from me, just based on sort of my experience with e-blasts. The first one is so important. Please make sure that you always have a footer at the bottom of your e-blast. So a footer right down the bottom that lets folks unsubscribe from your newsletter. Really important because it means that you're being compliant, which is what we want. Please be compliant. But also it sort of helps them confirm, like interact with you and confirm their communication preferences further. And it kind of helps to build that trust. They may love your organization, but they don't want to receive your newsletter. And giving that ability is going to make them feel more comfortable. So to do this, to add a footer, you just need this footer content block over here. And we automatically populate this with all the information that you need whenever you add it to an e-blast. If you use one of our pre-built e-blast templates, just make sure that you delete the footer that's on one of those and re-add your own, because the footers that we have in those are just kind of placeholders to show you how they look. They won't have your information in them. So all you need to do is delete them and just follow the steps that I'm about to do. So from here, I click and drag a 1-column row down here, and I just click and drag the footer. And I've got my unsubscribe link down here ready to go, and my mailing address on there as well to make sure I'm fully compliant. One thing to note about this unsubscribe link, it's actually created specifically for any contact who receives it. So if you try and test this out, it won't work for you just because you're not coming as a recipient testing it out. So if you want to see what it looks like, just send an e-blast to yourself and make sure you've got a contact profile in Keela and you can test it out that way. But otherwise, it's produced uniquely for every single contact in your database, and only they can kind of access it and interact with it. Okay, the final tip, I'll be very quick, but this is a cool one. I think this is the funnest tip I've got. When it comes to e-blast design, one thing I see folks sometimes have trouble with is the color palettes. And I've been on the receiving end of some fluorescent green e-blast with bright red font colors in the past from other types of industries, and they're awful. They're really hard to read, not accessible for folks who are hard of eyesight like I am, as you can see. So I want to make sure that nonprofits lead the industry in making their color palettes of their e-blast really beautiful. That's my one dream. And I thought this would be a good tip for you. If you're not sure how to generate a color scheme for your e-blast, or if you're wanting to do a branding revamp, you want to make your branding consistent so that folks, recognize it and come to sort of look forward to your colored emails, this is a website that can really help with that. It's the one that I use, but there's a bunch of different types of websites out there. So by all means, go find your own. But this is just the one that I use. And what it does, it lets me design a color palette. So I'm in Coolers, it's called. And if I go up to generate here, I can just click a button and generate one, and it will think a little bit, and then it will generate a color palette. Here's one that they've kind of designed, that their team has designed, that I could take and then use to color my e-blast. To be honest, this one's a little dramatic. I probably would just generate another one. Hope for some pastel colors. Oh, these are awful. Trust me, some of them are really good. I've been getting so many pastel ones lately that are beautiful. But anyway, you can see what I mean. Play around with it if you don't have a color scheme already. But if you do have a color scheme on your website, or maybe you have a logo that you want to base your e-blast off, I want to show you how you can create a color scheme based on that. Oh, that's lovely. That's a nice one. I'd pay that. Kind of looks like ice cream. But anyway, I'll show you how you can create a color scheme from your logo. So in here, if you click on the More button up here, you can pick palette from a photo. So I'll click on this one, and what you can do is just upload your logo directly in here, and it will draw the colors out. So if I find a special picture I have somewhere, let's go that one. And see how it's created these 5 colors based on this picture. So you can use your logo, or if you don't have a color scheme and you're wanting to change it every week, you could have a feature photo every week that you use to brand. So I'll just open in Generator, generate that color palette. Here it is. And I can click on these hex codes, these little numbers and letters down here, and copy them. Oh, I might do this one. Copy them. And if I jump back into Keela, I can use that to just paste directly in here. So I'll just paste it there, choose, and that's how it kind of connects back. And you can save these color palettes in the future. You can have one for marketing, one for fundraising, all that kind of stuff. So make beautiful e-blasts, everyone. I want to beat the private sector e-blasts. Okay, that's all I had for tips and design. Ooh, let me send it back to you, Sam. Oh, you took it. Thank you.
I took it.
That was the extent of my tech proficiency with Zoom. Thank you.
All right, everybody. So how do you create an effective newsletter? I'm hoping that last 49 minutes kind of went through it all between best practices for the industry, as well as how to directly translate those in Keela. But just to recap, so figure out the goal of your email. So what is your main call to action, that button that we chatted about, as well as which audience is this most relevant to? So whether you've had a chance to segment your list based on some of the newsletter frequency data you've gathered, or if you're just doing a blanket send to start off, just as you go, figure out who would that message be best suited for. Then you want to create a consistent schedule based on that newsletter frequency where you don't bombard your audience, and at the same time, you don't leave them wondering whether you've forgotten about them. So you want to write compelling subject lines, as we know, include donor-centric content that has plenty of visuals, and then make sure your branding is consistent and easy to view, like Elsie ran through. So the last one, number 5, track your campaigns. I didn't realize how much Elsie and I chatted. So this is something that we're actually going to come back and do a part 2 webinar for. So I challenge you to go away from this, either refresh your existing newsletters or start up a new one, gather some data, and then we're going to come back and do a full workshop just on email marketing metrics in Keela. You will be getting a take-home sheet as well if you want to get a head start on that with some of the content that we'll cover. But essentially for tracking, you never want to put all your time and effort into your email marketing if you don't know what's working and what's not. That's always going to be a bit of a catch-22. I mean, time in versus time out. You always want to make sure that what you're doing is important and obviously optimized. And essentially that's it. That's a crash course on how to set up a simple but effective nonprofit newsletter. So we are going to open the floor to questions. I know that Laura's been a busy bee answering most of the questions already.
I do have one thing to add. We had a question from Brenda, why don't you make this a default? And like Laura said, it's on all of the footers in our existing templates. Just make sure you refresh it so that it pulls your information and not the standard one. But the reason why we don't have it automatically on all of them is that when it comes to this kind of compliance, there's 2 types of communications that you can send out to folks. You can send out marketing emails, which all of this compliance applies to, and then you can send out transactional emails. And those are the emails that you need to send out in order to communicate with folks. And they're generally one-on-one emails. Usually you'd send that email just to the person who you're speaking to, but we wanted everyone to have the ability to not have a footer on their email in case they needed to send out a transactional email to a bunch of contacts at once. So maybe it'd be for things like if you had something serious happen that you needed to announce to everybody from your organization, you know, knock on wood, if your organization shuts down for a couple of months or something like that, and you need to get the word out to everyone really quickly, even folks who've unsubscribed because this is part of their volunteer program or something like that. So we want you to be able to send out marketing emails and mass emails for really important stuff.
We also had a question come in over email, and I know that
Nikki.
We didn't get to it in our webinar today, but we will definitely go through that in depth in our email marketing metrics webinar. But just to answer your question, so we don't leave you hanging. So we sent our e-blast in Keela, and looking at the stats, there's a section that says rejected. Could you explain that what that means and how we can avoid having rejected emails in the future?
100%. So first thing, if you're ever curious about what something means or how to use it, you can just click on this support button down the bottom and just type in rejected. And we've got sort of some information on it there as well if you want some extra tips and tricks. But here's how I would interact with rejected e-blasts. So I jump in here. I hope I've got someone. I don't think I have any examples of actual rejected e-blasts in my test account because it's fake, but I can show you what you would do. So this rejected button here, you can actually click on it. And what it would do is it would take you to a list of all the folks who are in there, and you can add those folks to a tag. So if you wanted to, you could then reach out to everybody in that tag and let them know that their email provider is incorrectly marking your e-blast as spam. It happens. You know, we don't know what the spam filters are for every email provider, and some of them are really specific if you've got too many images or if they've never received an email from you before, things like that. So you can just let them know, and to guarantee that your emails get through, they can just add your email address as a safe sender in their address book. So that's one way I would do that. I would try to avoid sending another e-blast to them, because if you continuously send e-blasts over and over to rejected email addresses and keep getting rejections back, it's called bad email hygiene. And what it means is that you're going to reduce your sender score because you're continuously being identified as spam. So the best way to avoid these rejections is to do things to improve your sender score, like making sure that folks add your email address to their address book. The best way to guarantee that really the only way to 100% guarantee that everyone's going to receive that email. Keeping them short. Longer e-blasts tend to trip up some spam filters. And just making sure that you're constantly checking that and you're keeping that list really clean.
Thanks, Els. We had another question come in to the chat. Actually, we've got a few. So we just had a question about the subscribe me form field when creating a subscription form. Is there any way to customize it or any plans to make it customizable in the near future?
To customize the question, I believe that we've got the request to be able to change the question in our product portal. I know that we'll be doing a lot of enhancements on eBlast this year, and we just so happen to have Carolyn, the head of product, on the phone call right now. So I'm sure Carolyn will take note of that. And if we're able to make that change, we definitely will, for folks to be able to edit what the question says, if we are.
Perfect. And yeah, Carolyn, definitely take notes on that. That's something I was curious about as well. We have another question from Vandana. Do you have any tips for improving email content so it doesn't get sorted in Gmail to promotions, social, etc.?
Great question. I don't really. Oh, Sam, you're going to answer that one. I would Google it to see. Maybe they've got something online.
So generally promotions are attached to like an e-commerce brand. So if your fundraising emails are getting sorted into promotions, it also depends on the habits of the Gmail user. So I have my inbox is set up like that with filters, but I will constantly move things in and out. So if I get a notification that someone signed up for my webinar, I would put that in my updates folder, and I would essentially train my Gmail inbox to sort that for me. So it is a little bit dependent on the user. That's a great question, and I don't actually know the answer to that, but I will research for you. And in the next webinar on email marketing metrics, I will definitely have a little section on that, because that's a very good point.
Yeah. I would have just been like, can you Google it? I have no idea. I didn't even know that it was based on my usage, although it checks out. I feel like Google would do that. They would start adjusting that based on how I use it.
I mean, I definitely would also recommend Googling it. They'll probably give a better answer than I just
Well, they
did.
give their secrets away. Who knows? Any more questions? Have I missed anything?
I think that's it for now. If there's no other questions, I'm going to awkwardly slide into my outro spiel, and then I'll pause myself if something else comes in. But yeah, so that concludes the session for today. Thank you so much for sticking with us, and I look forward to seeing all of your phenomenal newsletters. Please, seriously, send me your email. Send me with a subscribe link to samantha.lego@keela.com. I will happily sign up to your newsletter and give you feedback as I see it come into my inbox. I just want to remind everybody again that the session today was recorded, so you will be receiving the recording along with our slide deck and resources by the end of the week, if not by towards the end of the day. So thanks again, and I will see you all at our next Care Labs webinar. There's a 3-question survey at the end of this when you log off. Please take it. Please tell us what you want to see in your next Care Labs tutorial. We would love to hear from you. We're running out of ideas. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye. Bye.